Imagine if the biblical Great Flood actually happened. To save every living species on Earth, you build Noah's Ark. But if you look at this entire story strictly as a survival puzzle, the Ark is essentially just a massive, completely enclosed wooden box. According to the descriptions in Genesis, it measured 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Based on ancient measurements, that translates to a vessel roughly over 130 meters long, 20 meters wide, and more than 10 meters tall. That sounds massive at first glance. However, the moment you start packing in thousands of animals, human survivors, freshwater grain, tools, fuel, and a massive waste disposal system, that space vanishes instantly. The real challenge isn't figuring out how to fit everyone on board before the doors close. It is figuring out how to stay alive inside a dark, damp, claustrophobic wooden vault, tossing on a violent sea until the water finally goes down. What exactly do you eat to survive? Let me know your own survival strategy in the comments below. The most famous part of this story is always the 40 days and 40 nights of heavy rain. But for the people trapped inside the Ark, the moment the storm stopped didn't mean the danger was over. According to the narrative, the floodwaters covered the earth for months. The survivors had to drift aimlessly, waiting for that massive tide to slowly recede until solid ground finally reappeared for them to live on. This means your food supply cannot just last for 40 days. A realistic calculation means planning for hundreds of days, potentially up to a full year of total isolation inside a floating warehouse. In the beginning, you have to survive the violent storms. Then, you face a long, agonizing waiting game on an empty ocean. And finally, you must keep your seeds, animals, and tools in perfect condition, ready to rebuild agriculture from scratch the moment you touch land. On a vessel like this, space is the ultimate currency. Not every item gets a ticket to ride. While fresh vegetables and fruits are packed with nutrients, they also hold a high water content, take up far too much room, and rot within days. The food that actually keeps you alive on this journey needs to be dry, compact, shelf-stable, and incredibly high in calories, grains, beans, oils, nuts, dried fruits, salt, hard cheeses, and salted meats are worth infinitely more than a basket of fresh greens. The Ark isn't a functional kitchen. It is a swaying, unstable warehouse. Every single ration must pass a strict test. How long will it last? How much space does it take? And can you eat it without sunlight or a steady fire? Of course, you could bring modern industrial goods like canned rations, freeze, dried meals, and vitamin supplements to make it easier. Looking at this list of survival foods, which ones would you choose to bet your life on? When you are mapping out your food supply for an apocalypse, rice quickly becomes one of the most practical staples on the table. It is beautifully simple, dry, compact, incredibly easy to divide into rations, and straightforward to measure out day by day from a pure energy standpoint. A single kilogram of dry rice delivers over 3,000 calories. That is more than enough to cover the basic baseline energy needs of an adult for a full day. On board the ship, its versatility is a massive lifesaver. Or cook it down with extra water into a thick porridge to stretch your dwindling food supply when times get lean. For people trapped inside a dark, swaying cabin for months on end, rice requires no complex processing or fancy spices to keep you going. Its greatest strength is quiet and unassuming. It is just completely reliable. If rice provides stability, wheat offers flexibility. The true value of whole wheat lies in its ability to transform. If you keep the kernels whole, they can sit in storage for an incredibly long time, waiting until you need to grind them down into fresh flour to make flatbreads, thick batters, or simple porridges. Bringing whole wheat berries on board is a much smarter survival choice than packing bags of pre-ground flour. In a damp, humid environment like the Ark, fine flour absorbs moisture like a sponge, clumping together, spoiling, and attracting bugs within weeks. Keeping your grain in its original, unmilled state protects the nutrients inside, allowing you to process only what you need for each meal. Furthermore, wheat carries a deeper purpose on this journey. It is not just dinner for today, it is a promise for tomorrow. When the water finally clears and you step back onto land, these surviving kernels will be far more valuable than the last bag of edible flour, serving as the literal seeds to restart civilization. When you look back at the history of human survival, barley stands out as an ancient grain perfectly built for brutal conditions. It is naturally much tougher and more resilient than wheat, capable of growing in cold climates and poor, thin soils where other crops completely fail. On a long voyage, barley is an excellent addition to your soup pot, swelling up to thicken the liquid and providing a deep, heavy sense of fullness that keeps hunger at bay for hours. It admittedly has a rougher, coarser texture compared to the softness of wheat, but comfort is a luxury you can easily give up on the ark. Out here, the standards for a perfect food change completely. You want a grain that can sit in a dark hold without rotting, fill empty stomachs instantly, and cook all the way through using only a tiny amount of your precious firewood. The final essential grain to secure a spot on your inventory list is corn. Originating in the Americas, this incredible plant eventually spread across the globe to become a foundational food source for entire populations. Whole dried corn kernels can survive in long-term storage perfectly, or you can grind them into a versatile meal to create quick stovetop cakes and simple mashes. It is a remarkably efficient engine for producing calories. But its absolute greatest value to the ark begins the moment the voyage ends. Corn is famous for its massive yields and its ability to adapt to a wide variety of environments. As long as you manage to keep a portion of your corn inventory safe from dampness and hungry pests, during the long year at sea, this golden grain has the power to become one of the very first pioneer crops you plant in the fresh mud, jump-starting agriculture and rebuilding the food supply for a brand new world. Beans and legumes are easily your most critical source of protein on the ark. Dried varieties like kidney beans, chickpeas, and black-eyed peas are infinitely better suited for a long-term survival voyage than fresh meat, which would rot into a toxic hazard within days. While grains give you the raw energy to move, living on pure carbohydrates for months will eventually leave your muscles weak and depleted. Legumes step in to fix that problem, providing essential plant protein and a heavy, lasting sense of fullness. When you look back at the history of human survival, pairings like rice and beans, wheat and lentils, or corn and beans pop up across almost every early civilization. It is not a coincidence. These combinations are cheap. They last forever in a dark hold. And when eaten together, they give your body a complete, life-saving meal. Among all the legumes you could pack for an apocalypse, lentils might actually be the smartest choice for life on a closed vessel, because they are so small and flat. They cook incredibly fast and don't require the hours of pre-soaking that larger beans need. This allows you to protect two of your most precious resources on board, fuel and fresh water. Ancient communities across the Near East, South Asia, and the Mediterranean relied heavily on lentils for centuries, precisely because they store beautifully and easily boil down into thick, comforting mush. Inside a cramped cabin, where you cannot afford to waste your wood supply or deal with complicated cooking steps, the humble lentil quietly becomes a completely reliable lifesaver. Fats and oils are perhaps the most frequently overlooked survival foods on the planet. Grains and beans will keep your stomach full. But if your diet lacks fat entirely, your body will eventually lose its ability to retain heat. Deep exhaustion will set in, and your physical stamina will collapse. A single kilogram of plant oil delivers around 9,000 calories, offering a massive jump in energy density compared to regular grain. Oils like olive, sesame, and coconut, along with rendered animal fats, pack an incredible amount of fuel into a very small footprint. The catch is that fats are highly sensitive to light, heat, and oxygen. If left exposed, they quickly turn rancid and bitter, meaning they must stay tightly sealed in the coldest, darkest corners of the hold, treated as a precious fluid that you cannot afford to lose. Salt isn't a food source on its own, but it completely dictates whether your other supplies will survive the journey. In an environment with absolutely no refrigeration, salt is your primary line of defense for curing fish and meat, while also making plain pots of boiled grain palatable over long, monotonous months. Throughout history, salt was so valuable, it built trade routes and sparked empires. But on the Ark, its utility becomes brutally practical. If you use too little, your stored proteins will spoil, and your meals will become unbearably bland. If you use too much, you will drive up everyone's thirst. When your freshwater supply is strictly limited, every single pinch of salt must be measured with absolute precision. The ultimate irony of a global flood is that you are completely surrounded by water, but not a single drop of it is safe to drink. The rushing torrents outside are a toxic mix of thick mud, salt, debris, and decay. The Ark needs massive storage containers and a smart way to harvest the sky. During those initial weeks of heavy downpours, the rain is actually your safest source of clean water, provided you have clean surfaces to collect it. But once the storm stops, the clock starts ticking. Humans need water. Cooking grains requires water, and even sprouting seeds for vitamins demands it. Without a steady, clean freshwater supply, even a mountain of food is completely useless. Having food on the Ark is only half the battle. You still have to be able to cook it. Your rice, wheat, and beans all require a steady source of heat to become safely digestible. But lighting a fire on a wooden ship is an absolute logistical nightmare. The entire vessel is made of timber, surrounded by dry hay, grain sacks, flammable oils, and animal bedding. If a single spark gets out of control, your entire survival shelter instantly becomes a floating fire trap. Because of this, fuel must be heavily guarded. Cooking areas must be isolated on stone foundations, and proper ventilation is critical. A smart survival strategy means you cannot rely entirely on hot meals. Ready-to-eat foods like nuts, dried fruits, hard cheeses, and jerky become incredibly important during rough seas, when lighting a fire is simply too dangerous. When it comes to fish, your survival inventory on the Ark actually relies on two completely different phases. The first portion has to be prepared long before you ever step on board. This is your baseline safety net fish that has been thoroughly dried, heavily salted, or smoked to last for months. During those initial 40 days of relentless rain, the decks are slick, the wind is howling, and the entire ship is tossing violently. Trying to fish or process a catch in that chaos would be a death sentence. But once the storms pass and the water settles, a new opportunity opens up. With simple hooks, lines, and nets, you can begin harvesting the floodwaters around you. Every fish you catch at this stage does something incredible for your survival strategy. It provides a fresh meal for the day, and any extra can be processed into new dried reserves. This shifts the Ark's entire dynamic. It stops being a closed warehouse that only drains its resources, and slowly transforms into a living system that can harvest food from the world around it. Catching fresh fish is a massive victory, but it instantly triggers a brutal race against time. In a damp, enclosed wooden cabin, fresh meat rots in a matter of hours, bringing dangerous bacteria, pests, and foul odors into your tight living space. The moment the rain stops and the sun breaks through, the open deck must quickly become an outdoor processing line. To save the catch, the fish have to be gutted, cleaned, split open, and rubbed thoroughly with salt as fast as possible before being hung up on racks to dry. True preservation isn't just about a hot sun. It requires a steady flow of air to pull the moisture out of the muscle tissue. If the air outside stays too humid and damp, the meat won't dry. It will mold. When the weather refuses to cooperate, you have to abandon the deck and rely on heavy brining or smoky fires inside the cabins as your fallback defenses. To round out a long-term survival diet, you need concentrated bursts of energy and flavor that can survive the harsh environment. Dried and salted meats are incredibly valuable out here. Not because you are eating large meals every night, but because a small amount shaved into a plain pot of boiled rice or lentils completely changes the game. It infuses basic carbohydrates with vital fats and proteins, turning a survival ration into a comforting meal. Then you have nuts like almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. They are tiny, natural powerhouses packed with healthy fats and minerals, and they require absolutely no cooking. This makes them your ultimate emergency ration during rough seas, when lighting a fire on a wooden ship is simply too dangerous. The catch is that their natural oils can spoil in a warm, humid hold, meaning you need to consume them early in the voyage rather than saving them for the end. Finally, dried fruits like raisins, figs, and dates provide something just as important as physical calories, a psychological lifeline. They are lightweight, store beautifully for months, and add a vital burst of sweetness and fiber to a diet that can quickly become depressingly monotonous. Out on an empty ocean, a single piece of sweet fruit can be the very thing that keeps your spirit alive. Honey is one of the few natural sweet foods on Earth that can truly stand the test of time. As long as it is kept in a sealed container away from moisture, it simply will not spoil, remaining perfectly edible for years. On a long, bleak voyage, a small spoonful can instantly transform a plain bowl of boiled grain or a piece of hard flatbread, offering a fast burst of easily digestible energy. Inside a dark, damp wooden hull, thick with the overwhelming smell of animals, sweetness becomes about more than just physical survival. It serves as a brief psychological escape, a small reminder that normal life hasn't been completely wiped out. Because your supply is strictly limited, honey cannot be eaten casually as a regular meal. It must be treated as a precious luxury, saved for moments when the crew needs a quiet comfort on the hardest days. Fresh milk from cows or goats is incredibly fragile, breaking down and spoiling in just a few hours in a warm room. But humans long ago figured out a brilliant workaround to preserve this vital resource by turning it into hard cheese. By pressing out the moisture and adding plenty of salt, you create a nutrient-dense block that can sit on a shelf for months without refrigeration. Hard cheese delivers a powerful combination of fats, proteins, and calcium without requiring a single spark of fire to cook. When paired with basic flatbread or a few dried fruits, it instantly elevates a basic survival ration into a complete, satisfying meal. On the Ark, it functions as a highly concentrated dairy reserve. As long as you keep it safely away from the damp air to prevent surface mold, it remains one of your most valuable physical assets. If you are forced to bring live animals on a long survival voyage, chickens are easily one of the most practical choices you can make. They are small, they take up very little floor space, and they give you a steady supply of fresh eggs before eventually providing meat if necessary. An egg is essentially a perfectly packaged capsule of nutrients, loaded with high-quality protein, essential fats, and vital vitamins. As long as you keep the birds healthy, eggs represent a continuous, renewable food source rather than a one-time ration that you run through and lose forever. However, managing livestock inside a closed ship is never an easy task. Chickens still require their own feed, a clean space to nest, and constant attention. In a damp, crowded cargo hold, avian diseases can spread incredibly fast, and managing the waste becomes an immediate health hazard. They are incredibly valuable, but keeping them alive takes real work. When selecting larger mammals for the Ark, a goat is a far wiser choice than a massive cow. Cattle are simply too heavy, requiring enormous amounts of fresh water and prime grain just to survive day to day. Goats, on the other hand, are compact, nimble, and famously capable of thriving on tough, low, quality roughage that other livestock won't even touch. Their true value doesn't lie in a single harvest of meat, but rather in their ability to turn dry straw into a steady stream of fresh milk, which can then be fermented into yogurt or pressed into long-lasting cheese. Ancient mountain and desert societies relied on goats for centuries, precisely because of this legendary resilience. If you have to choose a sustainable mammalian resource for a closed, drifting vessel, the humble goat makes perfect sense over heavy livestock. The harsh reality of bringing a massive ark of animals to life is that their survival needs will quickly threaten your own. Herbivores need massive piles of dry hay, grains, and forage to survive the winter, while any carnivores require a steady supply of meat or high-protein alternatives. Every single animal you bring on board isn't just another life saved. It represents a major drain on your fresh water, a new mountain of waste to manage, and an endless amount of physical labor. Out on the ocean, your food logistics cannot just focus on human rations. The true complexity of the ark is that humans and animals are locked inside the exact same closed environment, sharing the same air and resources. If their ecosystem collapses, your survival strategy goes down right along with it. Living on a crowded wooden vessel means dealing with a constant, unyielding problem: animal waste. Thousands of creatures packed tightly together will produce massive amounts of manure, urine, and spoiled feed every single day. If you choose to ignore this mess, it will quickly destroy your chances of survival. Waste brings dangerous bacteria, parasites, soaring ammonia levels, and extreme humidity, all of which can easily ruin your stored grain and poison your drinking water. To prevent a catastrophic outbreak, the animal zones must be strictly isolated from human living quarters and fresh water. Even your daily cleaning routes must be carefully planned so that contamination never crosses paths with the kitchen or the food warehouses. In a tight, enclosed space, sanitation is the foundation of food safety. If you lose control of the cleanliness, everyone on board could get incredibly sick long before the first bag of grain ever runs out. To manage this crisis, materials like dry hay, wood shavings, rice husks, and wheat stalks become incredibly valuable as bedding. Spreading these dry materials across the animal pens helps absorb moisture, keeping the floors relatively dry and drastically cutting down on toxic odors. But you can't just pile up the foul bedding in a dark corner of the cabin. It has to be systematically collected and sealed away in a designated storage area. While this might seem like a simple cleaning chore, you are actually taking the first step toward building a vital nutrient system. If handled correctly, every bit of waste generated on the voyage can eventually be recycled into the engine that restarts your future agriculture. Animal manure is packed with essential nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, making it an incredible resource for farming. However, you cannot just throw fresh waste directly onto growing crops. Raw manure is highly acidic. It will burn plant roots instantly and spread dangerous pathogens to anything you try to eat. The safer, smarter method is to blend the waste with your used wood shavings and straw, allowing it to slowly decompose in sealed containers to break down the odor and kill off harmful bacteria. The ark is far too cramped for massive, high-temperature composting piles, but you can easily manage smaller, sealed batches in rotation. Once the relentless rains stop, this treated fertilizer can feed small container gardens on board, and eventually, it will serve as the primary resource to rebuild the ruined, muddy soil waiting for you on land. This slow process unlocks a vital planting cycle on the ship. The animals produce the waste, the dry bedding absorbs the moisture, the mixture decomposes into rich fertilizer, and that fertilizer feeds the next generation of plants. This simple loop ensures that waste stops being a toxic burden and instead becomes a valuable asset, slowly turning the ark from a dwindling warehouse into a self-sustaining ecosystem. You do have to be incredibly careful with how you use it. Though, if untreated fertilizer ever touches leafy greens that you eat raw, it will instantly become a vector for disease, turning your survival garden into a medical emergency. While you are waiting for land to reappear, growing fresh food inside the dark cabins becomes a major priority. Out of all your options, bean sprouts are easily the most practical crop you can raise on board. Seeds like mung beans, soybeans, lentils, and even wheat can sprout beautifully in complete darkness. They don't require a single handful of soil or any space on the open deck. All they need is a steady supply of clean water, a simple container, and a warm corner. While sprouts won't give you massive amounts of calories, they deliver a crisp, fresh texture and vital vitamins to a diet that would otherwise consist entirely of dry rations. They grow from seed to harvest in just a few days, making them the perfect way to get fresh nutrients into your system while the storm is still raging outside. Once the weather finally clears, you can step things up by growing microgreens. Tiny sprouts of radish, mustard, peas, and wheatgrass can be raised in shallow trays, taking up very little room while offering a massive boost of fresh nutrition. The trick with microgreens is that they need sunlight to develop, which means you cannot grow them during the initial weeks of heavy storms. But once the rain stops, you can line up these trays near windows or safe areas on the deck, creating a reliable supplement for your health. If you want to utilize the darkest, dampest corners of the ship, mushrooms are the ultimate choice. They don't rely on sunlight at all, instead thriving on organic matter like wood shavings, wet straw, and crop waste. On paper, the humid belly of the Ark seems like the perfect environment for a mushroom farm, but it is a delicate balance to maintain. Mushrooms require specific, clean conditions and controlled temperatures. If your growing area gets contaminated, you won't get a crop of edible food. You will end up with a dangerous layer of toxic mold. While they add wonderful flavor to a plain soup, mushrooms cannot provide the heavy calories needed to keep you moving, meaning they work beautifully as a culinary bonus, but never as your main survival anchor. While fresh green leaves rot within days inside a damp cargo hold, cabbage is a remarkably durable exception to the rule. Even better, it can be packed into barrels with salt to create sauerkraut, unlocking an entirely new timeline of preservation. Throughout maritime history, fermented vegetables were the secret weapon that kept long-distance crews alive, providing a vital shield against the horrors of scurvy. On the Ark, your fresh heads of cabbage are consumed during the first few weeks. But your fermented jars are your long-term insurance policy. Fermentation is essentially the hidden technology of survival. By controlling beneficial microbes rather than letting harmful bacteria take over, foods like sauerkraut, pickles, and sourdough bread keep your diet safe and your gut healthy. It is not just about raw calories. It is about preventing your body from quietly falling apart from a lack of vitamins. Over months of eating nothing but dry grain and salted meat, without a steady supply of vitamin C, your physical health will slowly erode during the long wait for the water to recede, making these tangy, preserved crops worth their weight in gold. Crops like potatoes and sweet potatoes are incredibly valuable assets to have on board, but you have to resist the urge to plant them inside the ship. Without strong, natural sunlight, a potato plant cannot photosynthesize enough energy to produce a real harvest, turning your efforts into a waste of resources. Instead, fresh tubers should be stored in a cool, dark corner and eaten as early-stage fresh food, while a careful portion is guarded as seed stock for the future. Sweet potatoes operate the same way. They are powerhouse crops that grow rapidly and provide clean carbohydrates. But their true destiny begins the moment you touch land. The same rule applies to raw paddy rice. The massive chaotic floodwaters outside are a toxic mix of debris and silt, completely unsuited for the delicate balance of a traditional rice paddy. On the Ark, your grains are strictly meant for eating and saving. These crops are your sleeping giants, waiting for the mud to settle so they can jumpstart agriculture and rebuild the food supply of a brand new world. Trying to grow anything on the open deck during the initial phase of the flood is an absolute impossibility. The howling winds, torrential rains, and violent rocking of the ship would instantly wash away your soil and drown your crops. But once the sky clears, The deck slowly transforms into your most valuable agricultural real estate. It becomes a space to set up shallow trays, racks, and small planter boxes. This open-air garden isn't meant to grow heavy staple grains like wheat or corn. It is designed for rapid growth crops like microgreens and fresh herbs that provide immediate, life-saving nutrition. Down below, cabin farming operates under a brutal set of constraints: zero natural light, cramped spaces, and poor air circulation. Trying to run a traditional farm down here is a fantasy. Interior agriculture must be treated as a highly compressed supplement system. You rely strictly on sprouts and mushrooms, foods that require minimal space and no sunlight, to keep your body functional while your main food warehouses do the heavy lifting. When you are locked inside a floating vault with starvation staring you in the face, the hardest things to manage aren't just your fears. They are your seeds, grains, legumes, and vegetable seeds. Carry a dangerous dual identity on the ark. They can easily fill a starving stomach today, or they can become the vast fields that feed you tomorrow. If panic takes over and you eat through your entire seed supply during a desperate week at sea, you might buy yourself a few extra days of survival. But you will completely destroy your ability to rebuild agriculture once you touch land. Because of this, a smart survival strategy requires a brutal, psychological separation of your supplies. One portion is strictly designated as daily rations, while the other is treated as a sacred archive for the future. True survival on the ark isn't just about outlasting the pouring rain. It is about ensuring that when the water finally clears, you still have the biological keys to grow the next season of human civilization. Out on the open water, the dangers aren't just the rising tides. It is the sheer amount of floating debris. The floodwaters are a chaotic highway of uprooted trees, destroyed houses, and heavy wreckage capable of puncturing a wooden ship to survive. You can build a brilliant external defense system by strapping spare timber to the outside of the hull. These external logs act exactly like modern boat fenders, absorbing the initial crushing impacts of floating heavy objects and protecting the structural integrity of the ship. Furthermore, because dry wood is naturally less dense than water, these logs provide a small boost of extra buoyancy. A few cubic meters of lightweight timber can lift hundreds of kilograms of pressure off the main frame. The catch is that you cannot just pile this wood anywhere. Every piece of cargo alters the delicate balance of the vessel. The ark isn't built for speed. It is built to stay upright, to prevent the ship from rolling dangerously in a storm. All heavy supplies, including your water tanks, grain reserves, and external timber, must be arranged low and centered along the middle line. If you stack the spare wood too high or unevenly on one side, you will shift the center of gravity, turning your protective armor into a weight that could capsize the entire ship. The first week of a global flood is easily the most dangerous phase of the entire journey. As the world disappears beneath the waves, the ark is thrown into total chaos. The ship is rocking violently. The animals are panicking in the dark, and your environment is completely unstable. This is absolutely not the time to worry about complex cooking, fishing, or running a cabin garden. Your primary goal during these first 7 days is simply establishing order and preventing disaster, which means keeping your fires completely unlit. On a wooden vessel packed with dry straw, animal bedding, grain sacks, and oils, an open flame in a rough sea is an instant death sentence. Fire must be heavily rationed and saved only for critical tasks later on, like purifying water or smoking fresh meat. To survive the initial shock, you must rely entirely on your immediate, ready-to-eat reserves. Handfuls of nuts, dried fruits, hard cheeses, and pre-cured jerky become your greatest assets. They require zero fire, zero prep, and zero fresh water to consume. By keeping the stoves cold and the meals simple during the opening act of the storm, you minimize the risk of fire and panic, creating the quiet stability needed to survive the long, silent months ahead. Once the initial chaos settles and life on board finds a grim rhythm, your grains and legumes take center stage as the core of your diet. Rice porridge, simple flatbreads, lentil soups, and grain stews become your daily fuel. This is the critical moment. You must start ruthlessly auditing your cargo holds. You need to sift through the darkness to hunt down dampness, gray mold, or any signs of contamination leaking from the animal pens. It is also the perfect time to start small-scale bean sprouting experiments, using almost zero footprint to introduce fresh nutrition into your system. This first month ultimately decides whether you will survive the long haul. In long-term survival scenarios, failure rarely happens because people run out of food entirely. It happens because they lose control of their logistics and allow their reserves to rot. The moment the heavy rains finally stop, the Ark enters a completely new phase of survival. The upper deck becomes accessible again, though the waters outside remain deeply dangerous and unpredictable. Now, your strategy evolves from pure hiding into active management. You can begin catching and drying fish, harvesting the final downpours of clean rainwater, and checking the ropes on your external timber defenses. Below deck, your experiments with sprouts, microgreens, and mushrooms can scale up while animal waste and bedding are systematically categorized and stored away for fertilizer. The Ark is no longer just a passive warehouse waiting for a miracle. It is transforming into a slow-moving, recycling ecosystem. But every move must be deeply calculated. You cannot let the excitement of using the deck distract you from the lingering dangers of rough seas, hidden contamination, and ship stability. When the floodwaters finally begin to recede, your food strategy undergoes a massive shift from how do we stay alive to how do we start over. You will need to keep leaning heavily on your remaining dry rations, because the newly exposed ground won't be ready for farming right away. The earth outside will be a harsh wasteland of thick mud, salt deposits, and decaying matter, completely lacking a stable topsoil. This is exactly when your preserved seeds, livestock, tools, and stored fertilizer reveal their true worth. Fast-growing, hardy crops like beans, radishes, mustard greens, potatoes, and sweet potatoes will become your frontline pioneer crops to stabilize the ground, while heavy grains like wheat and corn will require much more time and land to rebuild. Ultimately, the ideal survival inventory for the Ark isn't about finding a single miracle superfood. It is about building a perfectly balanced network of resources. Grains provide the baseline calories. Legumes deliver the vital proteins. Fats, nuts, hard cheeses, and livestock keep your energy dense, while salt, fermentation, and dried meats preserve your nutrition and keep morale alive. Sprouted seeds and mushrooms protect your health with essential vitamins, while chickens and goats provide continuous dairy and future breeding stock. In the dark, damp, tossing belly of the Ark, traditional agriculture is a fantasy. Survival boils down to a brutal mathematical equation involving space, water, light, fire, and waste. The ones who make it to the end aren't necessarily the ones who boarded with the biggest pile of food, but the ones who knew how to keep every single resource flowing. What would you add to this ultimate Ark survival checklist? Let me know your answers in the comments below.